The United States and Canada are two great neighbors, bound by history, trade, and more than 5,000 miles of the longest undefended border in the world. But what if that border wasn't as permanent as we think? Imagine this. What if some US states, fed up with Washington politics or drawn to Canada's stability, decided to break away? Sounds crazy, right? Well, maybe not, because several US states already have deep economic, cultural, and even political ties to Canada. And if current trends continue, this idea might not be so far-fetched after all. So today, we're asking, could these American states actually join Canada? Let's join the global lens as we count down the 10 states most likely to make the move north, and the reasons behind this quiet shift. Number 10. Vermont. The rebel with a maple soul. Vermont is a small state, but it's full of character. Known for its maple syrup, historic wooden bridges, and progressive political spirit, it's a place where Bernie Sanders is seen as a cultural icon. But did you know that Vermont was once an independent country? From 1777 to 1791, Vermont didn't belong to the United States, or any other nation. It had its own government, its own currency, and even its own constitution, one of the first documents in America to ban slavery. When it joined the Union in 1791, not everyone in Vermont supported the move. Traces of that independent spirit still exist today, most clearly seen in a movement called the Second Vermont Republic. This group advocates for leaving the United States to form an independent country, or even to join Canada. Why Canada? Because Vermont's values, like universal healthcare, environmental policies, cooperative economics, and a socially progressive outlook, align more with Canada than with Washington. And that's not all. Vermont also has deep economic ties with the province of Quebec. They share a border, French-Canadian cultural roots, and hundreds of millions of dollars in trade every year. So, if one day Vermont decides to leave the United States, don't be surprised if it looks north and asks to join the Canadian Federation. A new Quebec in the heart of America? It may sound crazy, but Vermont's history has always been anything but ordinary. Number 9. Maine, power of the North. If you've ever been to Maine, you'll understand right away. This place feels distinctly northern. Cold winds from the Atlantic, dense pine forests, and coastal villages resemble scenes from Canada more than New York or Boston. But the connection goes beyond just the landscape. Maine depends on Canada to keep the lights on. Most of Maine's electricity comes from Hydro-Quebec, one of Canada's largest power companies, which generates clean energy from hydropower. Each year, billions of dollars in trade flow between Maine and eastern Canadian provinces like New Brunswick and Quebec. Culturally, Maine has many French-speaking communities descended from the Acadians, sharing a history with what is now Canada. The slower pace of life, closeness to nature, and strong sense of community resemble Canada's maritime provinces more than the rest of the U.S. History also supports the idea of breaking away. Maine was once part of Massachusetts but split off and became its own state in 1820, a clear precedent for separation if necessary. So, if Maine once had the courage to leave Massachusetts, who's to say it couldn't do the same with the United States? And this time, the destination might not be independence, but a more stable home in the north, Canada. Number 8. New Hampshire, freedom, or join Canada. New Hampshire is famous for its motto, live free or die. And it's not just words. This state has no sales tax, no personal income tax, and a deeply independent political tradition. People here value self-determination, small government, and minimal interference. In terms of trade, New Hampshire does over $8 billion in business with Canada each year. Products ranging from wood and machinery to pharmaceuticals regularly cross the border. In terms of lifestyle, nature lovers in New Hampshire live in a way that closely resembles people in provinces like Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, hiking, camping, biking, and growing their own food. So, if the US sinks into instability and the people of New Hampshire feel that their value of true freedom is under threat, they might look north to a place where similar values are still preserved. And in that scenario, the motto, live free or die, might just become, live free and become a part of Canada. Number 7. Minnesota, cold weather. But warm-loved Minnesota and Canada share a nearly 900-kilometer border, along with over $7 billion in annual trade. But this relationship isn't just about economics. It's a blend of culture, lifestyle, and history. Think of ice hockey, months of snow, thick wool sweaters, and a calm, gentle way of speaking. Minnesota and provinces like Manitoba or Ontario share striking similarities. Before officially joining the United States in 1858, parts of Minnesota were under the control of British and Canadian fur trading companies, like the Hudson's Bay Company. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, many towns in the northern part of the state had strong ties to settlements across the border. Today, some Minnesota residents still hold dual U.S.-Canadian citizenship, and many families frequently visit each other as if the border were just a faint line. Ideologically, Minnesota leans toward moderate politics, community-based values, and social welfare systems, values that align closely with modern-day Canada. So, if the United States were to enter a major crisis, would Minnesota, with its heart already long connected to the north, be one of the first places to consider a new life under the red maple leaf? Number 6. North Dakota. The unofficial Canadian province North Dakota may not often make headlines, but when it comes to its relationship with Canada, the two are almost under one roof. Canada is North Dakota's #1 trading partner, with over $6 billion in goods exported each year. Agricultural, energy, and industrial products from the state are regularly found in central Canadian provinces, especially Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But the connection doesn't stop at economics. Many towns in North Dakota rely on healthcare and services from Canada, where the public healthcare system is more efficient and less costly. In border regions like Pembina or Bottineau, Canadian license plates appear just as frequently as American ones. Ideologically, North Dakota tends to lean conservative, valuing free enterprise and small government, interests that parallel the province of Alberta, which has itself been known for a movement to separate from Canada in favor of a model more like a U.S. state. Notably, in the past, there was even an idea to form a North Dakota-Manitoba economic union. While it never materialized, it shows one thing. People here are not unfamiliar with thinking beyond national boundaries. So, if American politics were to become unstable or if people started looking for a more stable model, could North Dakota turn to the north and officially become part of Canada? Number 5. Montana, the highland land with Canadian spirit. Montana, where vast prairies meet the towering Rockies, is a wide, wild, and very peaceful land. But few people know that Montana and Canada share a much deeper connection than many might think. Montana borders 3 Canadian provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. All 3 share agricultural and mining cultures, as well as political ideologies, that are very similar to Montana's. Each year, billions of dollars in trade pass through these border crossings, from cattle and grains to heavy machinery. Residents on both sides cross like neighbors, to shop, visit family, or even receive medical care in Canada. Unlike bustling urban states, Montana has a slower pace of life, surrounded by nature and a community that values self-reliance, tranquility, and environmental conservation. Do those 3 values sound familiar? They are also core values in many parts of Canada, especially Alberta and British Columbia. There are small towns in northern Montana that accept the Canadian dollar. Some rural areas broadcast Canadian television and listen to CBC Radio daily. Many families here have relatives across the border. One day, you might drive through Montana and realize you've entered Canadian territory, without needing to change anything but your license plate. If things go south, don't be surprised if Montana looks north instead of east. Number 4. Washington, the state of freedom looking north. Washington state has always stood apart from much of the U.S., both geographically and ideologically. Nestled in the Pacific Northwest, it shares a long border with British Columbia, and its largest city, Seattle, is closer to Vancouver than it is to many American metropolises. This closeness is not just geographical but cultural as well. Seattle and Vancouver are like sister cities, both hubs of technology, environmental consciousness, and progressive politics. Washington's economy is highly connected with Canada's. Billions of dollars in trade cross this border every year, especially in sectors like forestry, tech, aerospace, and agriculture. Canadian companies have major investments in the state, and likewise, Washington firms operate widely in Western Canada. This integration runs deep. Beyond economics, there's a cultural synergy. Washingtonians pride themselves on environmental stewardship, universal healthcare advocacy, and civil liberties, all ideals more often associated with Canadian society than with some American regions. In fact, during times of political turmoil in the US, spikes in internet searches like, "How to move to Canada," were unusually high in Washington state. There's even a light-hearted yet recurring joke that Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia should unite into a new nation called Cascadia. While mostly symbolic, this sentiment reflects a genuine desire among many residents for a political and cultural environment more aligned with Canada's values. So, if the US were ever to fragment due to political or economic instability, Washington might not just look north for inspiration. It might actually make a move toward joining its northern neighbor. Number 3. Alaska, the distant land with northern kinship. Alaska, isolated from the lower 48 states, already shares more in common with Canada than with much of the continental United States. It borders the Yukon and British Columbia, and in many ways, Alaskans and Canadians in those provinces lead similar lifestyles, rugged, self-reliant, and deeply connected to the land. Historically, Alaska was once Russian territory before it was sold to the United States in 1867. That foreign transition makes it a unique case, as its integration into the US was not driven by shared cultural or political history, but rather by geopolitical strategy. Since then, it has developed independently, sometimes feeling like an outlier in American politics. Economically, Alaska is tied to Canada through energy, mining, and infrastructure projects. Pipelines, highways, and railways often require bilateral agreements between the two countries just to function. In terms of healthcare and education, many rural Alaskans actually travel to Canada for services that are unavailable in their own communities. Given Alaska's political independence, geographic isolation, and practical reliance on its Canadian neighbors, it's easy to imagine a scenario where Alaska decides its interests are better served under the Canadian flag, especially if Washington, D.C., feels distant or unresponsive. Number 2. Michigan, the bridge between two worlds. Michigan might not be the first state that comes to mind when thinking about potential Canadian provinces, but it should be. Thanks to the Great Lakes, Michigan has some of the closest physical and economic ties to Canada of any U.S. state. The Detroit-Windsor border is one of the busiest commercial crossings in North America, handling hundreds of millions of dollars in goods every single day. Michigan and Ontario share manufacturing industries, particularly in automotive production. Detroit and Windsor practically function as a single metro area in some respects. Workers commute across the border, families have roots on both sides, and joint economic development projects are common. Politically, Michigan has experienced significant polarization, leading many residents to question their future within the broader U.S. landscape. Meanwhile, the Canadian model of healthcare, labor protections, and gun control appeals to segments of Michigan's population who desire greater social stability and security. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, or the UP, has even flirted with the idea of secession from the rest of the state in the past. Culturally and geographically closer to Ontario than to Detroit, the UP shares similar values of nature conservation, slow-paced living, and tight-knit communities. With such a unique position as a bridge between two countries, Michigan could become more than just a trade partner to Canada. It could one day be part of the Federation, especially if America faces a crisis that pushes its states to reconsider their alliances. Number 1. Oregon, the Pacific progressive powerhouse. Finally, we arrive at number 1, Oregon. Known for its progressive values, environmental activism, and vibrant alternative culture, Oregon might just be the U.S. state most ideologically aligned with Canada, particularly with British Columbia. Much like Washington, Oregon has flirted with the idea of forming the new nation of Cascadia. Though currently symbolic, this movement stems from real frustrations with federal politics in Washington, D.C., and a desire to forge a more sustainable, egalitarian society. Many Oregonians see more in common with Vancouver than they do with states like Texas or Florida. Economically, Oregon has strong ties to Canada in trade, energy, and technology. The Port of Portland and Canadian shipping hubs are part of the same supply chain network. Cultural exchanges are common, and educational institutions in both regions often collaborate on research, especially in environmental science and climate policy. Environmentally, Oregon's laws on carbon emissions, green energy, and public land management are more in line with Canadian provinces than with other U.S. states. The public support for universal health care and gun control in Oregon mirrors Canadian public opinion more than American trends. And most importantly, Oregon has shown time and again that it is not afraid to push for radical change when the political climate demands it. If the U.S. were to splinter due to internal chaos or severe partisanship, Oregon might lead the charge in finding a new political home, one that already reflects its values and vision for the future. And that home might just be Canada. So, what do you think? Could you see any of these U.S. states one day joining Canada if the political tides turn and the American Union begins to fracture? While it may sound far-fetched today, history shows us that borders can shift, alliances can change, and nations can be reimagined. Whether driven by economics, shared values, or sheer survival, the idea of certain states realigning with Canada isn't entirely out of the question, especially if stability, security, and social unity become more valuable than national pride. Let us know in the comments which state you think would fit best in Canada, or if there's another one we didn't include that you believe should be on this list. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future deep dives into global politics, geography, and the fascinating possibilities that shape our world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one, right here on 10 Globe Trips.